Ireland may get as much as $130 billion in bailout money from the European Union and the IMF. My next guest says Portugal will go down the same road as Ireland. Jonathan Lemco is a principal and senior analyst at Vanguard, and he covers sovereign debt markets. So, Jonathan, does that mean that you're not convinced that this is going to be contained?
No, I don't think this is going to be contained at all. I do think that what happened this weekend is a good thing. It's a necessary thing. Ireland clearly needed the money, and particularly its banks did. But from an investor perspective, there's no reason to believe why this contamination, if you will, this should not spread to Portugal, which has very, very serious fiscal problems of its own.
But why is that? Because obviously the Irish officials and the EU and the IMF believe that this will, in fact, restore investor confidence.
Yeah, they certainly, I think from the perspective of the EU and these IMF officials, they saw this as a necessary step. They were hoping it would restore investor confidence. There was no guarantee of that. And in fact, as we know, until this past early the weekend, the Irish Prime Minister was insisting they would not need help until they chose to accept it, of course. But underlying all of this is the fact that first Greece, then Ireland, Portugal, maybe Spain, although I have doubts there, all had serious, serious fiscal problems that are simply not going away. So what we have is a short-term panacea, a short-term stopgap, if you will. In the Irish case, we know that they were self-funded through June of next year. Now they've gotten probably another year, probably two, to work with. But after that, we could be returning to this again unless we see growth. Key to this entire process will be some kind of meaningful growth in these peripheral countries of Europe. And in the absence of that, we're going to be returning to this crisis-like situation for a very long time.
So is that a matter then, Jonathan, of just sort of biding time and waiting for the Eurozone to recover and restore that growth?
We can't just bide time. Obviously, we do what we can to promote investment in the region, in Europe. They themselves will be undertaking austerity measures to cut their deficits and their debts. They themselves will be doing what they can to promote investment, both domestic and foreign as well. All of this is our necessary conditions, and then we have to hope for the best. Ultimately, we need worldwide recovery as well. To a significant degree, if other richer countries of Europe continue to do well, that will have spillover positive effects for peripheral Europe too. We know that Germany seems to be thriving. Now we need to see other rich countries of Europe thriving too. If they do, then they will invest more in the Irelands and in the Spains and in the Portugals and the Greeces, and that will also help. But ultimately, these countries have to get their act together on their own.
But why does it sound like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but why does it sound like the buck stops with Portugal?
Because Spain, although usually classified as one of the peripheral countries, because of its terrible fiscal problems, does have advantages Portugal doesn't. Most notably, it has a highly diversified industrial base. It's got a lot of industry. It's got a reasonably educated population. It's a much bigger population. It's got more wealth. It has certain strengths that Portugal probably doesn't. That's why best guess is this won't spread in a meaningful way to Spain. But I suggest it's a guess because it's possible.
Okay, so Jonathan, then leave us with this thought. How long before it plays out to the end? I mean, what are we talking about in terms of infecting Portugal and then so on?
All right, again, educated guessing, but I think in the case of Portugal, we need to see some meaningful growth in the next quarter or 2 quarters. And if we don't, then within 6 months to a year, we'll be revisiting this whole notion of bailing out of Portugal.
All right, the cycle repeats. Jonathan, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Jonathan Lemco, principal and senior analyst at Vanguard, talking about the Ireland situation.